What's up everybody, Dan here. Thanks so much for joining in for today's video. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into sim racing force feedback settings. Now just to be clear, this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to set up force feedback in any specific sim, and this also won't be a comparison on what sims have the best force feedback. What I'm actually trying to accomplish here is have a general conversation about the various ways in which developers approach implementing force feedback settings for the end user in all sims in general. And as always, guys, I intend these videos to be a conversation, so please let us know your thoughts on the situation in the description below as well. There are typically two camps when it comes to how developers implement force feedback into a sim, and I'm going to give them simple names. And so the first approach is what I like to call the simple approach, and then at the other end of the spectrum, there's what I like to call the complex approach. And these are quite different from each other, and both have their own set of pros and cons. They're also very different when it comes to how the player actually interacts with the settings in game, as well as what results we're able to get out of those settings available to us. So I'm going to try to do three things in this video. First, I'm going to talk about each one of these approaches separately, and then I'm going to give a few objective pros and cons, and then at the end I'll give you my subjective preference and tell you which way I think personally is the best. And of course, as you're listening in here, definitely let us know your thoughts in the description, as I said earlier. All right, so let's first talk about the simple way. So sims with this approach typically have very few sliders or adjustments that can be made at all. iRacing is a perfect example of this. There's basically one slider that adjusts the overall strength and not really much else that you can change or manipulate. There's no way to modify individual effects. You just adjust the overall strength for your specific wheelbase and you head out on track. That's absolutely it. There's nothing more to it. So what's the pros of doing it this way? Well, first, it ensures that everyone has a very similar force feedback feel in the game. No matter what wheelbase you have or where you're playing, if you're going to play a sim like iRacing, it's pretty sure that you're going to have a pretty similar experience to someone else outside of the capabilities of your specific wheelbase. But outside of that, the force feedback for everyone is pretty much going to feel exactly the same across the board. Second, you're feeling the force feedback exactly as the developer intended it to feel. And that is very important because most sims, the force feedback is a counterpart to the physics baked into the game. So certain things need to happen in the force feedback when key events happen in the physics or in the telemetry. And having minimal adjustments to the force feedback settings ensures that those things happen exactly when they're supposed to, or at least when the developer intended them to. So what are the cons? Well, the biggest con is pretty obvious here, and this is that it severely limits people who like to dial in the intricate details of their force feedback. There's just no way to tune force feedback further in than the default settings in sims that go with this very simple approach. Also, force feedback is very subjective, so it could potentially turn some people away that don't like that specific force feedback feel right out of the box. And if you're not offering them a way to quote unquote fix it with additional settings, more than likely you're going to lose those players to another sim. Okay, so now let's discuss the complex approach, and this is going to be the exact opposite. This is the complete other end of the spectrum where there are lots of individual adjustments and settings that you can tweak and make changes to. There are a lot of sims that do it this way, but believe it or not, the best example is probably the latest Forza Motorsports. There are sliders upon sliders upon sliders in this game, and there are many other sims that do it this way. And each one of these sliders and these settings adjust a very specific effect deep within the force feedback. Now, objectively, just like with the simple approach, this does also have its own set of pros and cons. And I'd say the greatest pro here is the ability to account for variations in different wheelbases. Not every wheelbase is the same, we all know that, and not every wheelbase has the same dynamic range or overall strength. So having the ability to dial in force feedback perfectly or precisely to your specific wheelbase is really a great feature. Also, for those people who like to tinker with force feedback, you can literally spend hours making adjustments to get that perfect feel. Now, on the con side, the biggest one is it's very easy to actually get the force feedback wrong instead of getting it right. Because there are so many intricate adjustments that can be made, it's hard to tell what each change is actually doing. And also many times making a change that could be positively affecting that specific slider can affect and cause an adverse effect to another setting. So it's kind of this back and forth of trying to get everything right. And it's a bit challenging to get it perfect. And in many cases, you'll actually get further away from your ideal setup than you will be getting to it. Also, it's very easy to accidentally bury important effects underneath less important ones. For example, raising road feel up too high can impact how well you can feel front end grip and understeer. And these are just a few examples, but hopefully you understand the differences here. Now we're going to jump over and be subjective. And subjectively, the one that I personally prefer myself is the simple approach. And that's because I like not having to mess with a bunch of settings to get my force feedback feeling right. I want to simply boot up the game, get out on track, and race. And I also like knowing that the force feedback by default that I am feeling is what the developer intended for me to feel. And then also I will just add, personally, I don't feel like it's my job to make the force feedback feel right. I think that is just a lazy approach on some developers' part. Again, Forza Motorsports is a fantastic example of this. I think it's their job to get the force feedback right, and then let us just adjust how much overall force we want from our specific wheelbase, and we just want to race and have fun. So personally, I don't want to have to deal with all that, but again, that's just my personal take. But typically, these are the two different ends of the spectrum. So let me know in the comments what you guys prefer. But anyways, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, guys, I appreciate you watching the video, and I will talk to you in the next one. We'll see you later.